For now, let's go back to Brexit and get more reaction to the talks overnight in Brussels, which are being described as a breakthrough. The European Commission says enough progress has been made about citizens' rights, the Irish border and the size of the so-called divorce bill to move on to the second stage of talks, and that will include trade negotiations. One of the main sticking points was the issue of which court would guarantee the rights of EU citizens in the UK. This is what the Prime Minister had to say.
The deal we've struck will guarantee the rights of more than 3 million EU citizens living in the UK and of 1 million UK citizens living in the EU. EU citizens living in the UK will have their rights enshrined in UK law and enforced by British courts. They will be able to go on living their lives as before. I was clear in Florence that we're a country that honours our obligations. After some tough conversations, we've now agreed a settlement that is fair to the British taxpayer. It means that in future we will be able to invest more in our priorities at home, such as housing, schools and the NHS.
Ireland's Prime Minister Leo Varadkar welcomed the deal and said conditions are now in place for the next phase of negotiations to start.
We have achieved all that we set out to achieve in phase one of these negotiations. We have the assurances and guarantees we need from the United Kingdom and support for them from the European Union. I am satisfied that sufficient progress has now been made on the Irish issues. The parameters have been set and they are good. Now we can move on to work out the detail of what has been agreed to talk about the transition phase, free trade and the new relationship between the EU and the UK.
But the European Union's chief Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier warned there were still difficulties to be faced and little time to tackle them.
My recommendation, and the recommendation of the College of Commissioners, is that the progress achieved today is sufficient to move to the next phase. It's now up to the European Council to decide whether this constitutes sufficient progress and to move the talks to the next stage. We will then have completed the first chapter of this extraordinary negotiation.
Our political correspondent Chris Mason is in Westminster. Hi again, Chris. A lot's happened between the Downing Street Christmas party last night and this morning. Can you bring us up to speed with what's happened? And I understand you have a bit more detail on the actual text.
Yeah, as you were there, Tina, cantering through the clips of the main players, and yes, you're right, it was rather a long night. In fact, it's one of those mornings where there will still be people in Downing Street talking about what a long evening it has been, because there hasn't been a huge amount of sleep been had in the upper echelons of the British government. The Prime Minister and David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, jumping on a plane in the middle of the night to get out to Brussels in time for those news conferences we were just watching there that were happening at silly o'clock this morning. As those were happening, along came this document. This is the document published, the joint report from the negotiators of the European Union and the United Kingdom government. In other words, where the compromises have been found. And yes, there are compromises in here. So, for instance, on the issue of citizens' rights, there is a clear line in here that says that the overall court, the Supreme Court, if you like, of the European Union, the European Court of Justice, will maintain a role in the UK after Brexit regarding citizens' rights, those EU citizens who are living here in the UK after Brexit. Now, Downing Street is at pains to point out this is only likely to involve a handful of cases, but it's an insight into a compromise. And, for instance, Nigel Farage, the former leader of the UK Independence Party, has described this document, this negotiation, these compromises, as amounting to no Brexit. He sees it as a compromise too far. Politically, though, and this is very important from the Prime Minister's perspective, firstly, she has a deal, and that is a triumph given where she was just a matter of days ago with that humiliation in Brussels on Monday. So gone away of those questions about whether or not she'd survive as Prime Minister, would the Conservatives have to elect a new leader, could there be a general election in the new year? They've gone away at least for now. In that sense, that's a triumph for the Prime Minister. Lots of her cabinet this morning leaping out of the blocks to appear on the telly or the radio or go on social media and say how well the Prime Minister has done. But, and this is a really big but, and I know pesky reporters like me like to say stuff like this, but it's important because it's true. What is coming next, the negotiation about the future relationship with the European Union, as opposed to unpicking the current relationship, is going to be just as knotty, if not more so, just as complicated, if not more so, and with just as many moments where there are 3 steps forward and 4 steps back. Sorting out what the UK's relationship with our nearest neighbours is going to look like for the next generation and beyond in a very tight time frame next year is also going to be an almighty challenge. So a big moment for the Prime Minister today, but a big challenge still to come.
Chris Mason, thank you very much. And Bob Padron runs care businesses employing EU citizens. I'm joined by him in the studio right now. Paweł Ozakowski is an EU citizen and is in our Edinburgh newsroom. And we are also joined this morning by Olga Garcia, who is a Spanish migrant worker. Before we speak to you, Olga, let's hear a little of what you had to say when you appeared on the programme last year, shortly after Britain voted to leave the EU.
Well, the first thing, I feel a little insecure because after 4 years, I don't know what is going to happen. I'm a little lucky because next year I can ask for dual nationality, but most of my work colleagues and everything, they cannot do that. They don't know what is going to happen in the future. Well, to be honest, nobody knows.
How does it feel, Olga? Good morning, first of all. How does it feel listening to yourself and your reaction a year ago, and how do you feel now?
Well, this is great news, to be honest. For me, I feel much more relaxed right now regarding my future in the UK.
Why?
And I think a lot of the UK citizens, they feel the same.
Why is that? Is that just based on Theresa May this morning saying that citizens, EU citizens' rights, all 3 million living in the UK, would be protected?
Yes, it is, because at the end of the day, every day is like, you don't know what is going to happen, but right now at least you see like an end. You know, she said that we can be relaxed. Most of the people that we are already here living in the UK, that we can be relaxed, and that is good news for me.
What has the past year been like for you, living with that uncertainty about your future? You work for Bob, I understand.
Yeah, I work for Penrose Care, and it was a bit stressed because at the end of the day, Penrose Care, most of my colleagues, we are all from abroad, so we don't know what is going to happen. We don't know if we could stay here or we have to leave for jobs. So it was very, very stressed.
Paweł, good morning. How do you feel about today's news?
Hi, hello. I am slightly relieved that we're finally moving forward with everything. However, when you read the media, they all talk about personal victory of Theresa May rather than about victory of Britain. So I would like to see how this is going to actually come out for Britain and for, you know, us, people born outside of Britain.
And tell us about how you ended up in the UK in the first place. You're in Edinburgh, aren't you?
Yes, I've lived in Edinburgh for about 13 years now. I'm still not a UK citizen, though, because I did my doctorate in the middle of that stay. And with the new rules, that sort of resets your 5 years. But I've been here and I fell in love with this most beautiful country in the world. And now I live here, I have family here, I own a property here, I have a wonderful career.
And I understand you said you bought your property the day before Brexit and wouldn't have purchased it had you known the result.
Absolutely. That was sort of the saddest day of my life on many levels, because that's the most uncertain financial decision I've ever made. Just imagine being tied to a place for 20-something years, so however long the mortgage lasts, and not knowing if, you know, you can be here.
Bob, you run a care business. How does this affect you?
Well, I think it lifts a major cloud in terms of what kind of contingency planning we need to put in place in case the status of our current EU national staff was put in jeopardy. So it does relieve that stress. Of course, in the grand scheme of social care, there is an unprecedented recruitment crisis, and that existed before Brexit. So this kind of guaranteeing the status quo only makes things less bad. I mean, things are still very difficult in terms of the recruitment scene in social care. But of course, it has Brexit, the impact of the Brexit vote on social care recruitment have been severe. We have done our best to insulate ourselves from these consequences.
Well, can you give us a sense of how many people you employ from the EU?
80%. So roughly
80%
of our staff are from the EU. I know that's much higher than the sector. I think the sector is 1 out of 20.
And the business operates here in the UK?
Yes, in North London.
Right. People watching at home may think, why aren't you making more of an effort to employ British workers? What would you say to them?
Penrose Care puts an incredible amount of effort to employ the best people who can work in social care, whether they're from Britain, from the EU, or elsewhere. We do that by providing good working conditions. We're one of the few home care providers that pays the London living wage. We pay for travel time between client A to client B. I know there's a controversy about sleep-in shifts. We've always paid at least the minimum wage for sleep-in shifts, so we have done our best in terms of working conditions to attract locals. But in the end of the day, if people do not want to do this job, we need to look for people who do. And
So you're saying that British people aren't applying for those jobs?
Exactly. I mean, it could just be where we are in London. I do know that our proportion of EU nationals in our staff is higher than average. It's much higher than average, and that could, I don't know the reason for that. It could just be where we're based. But we're, you know, of course we are agnostic on where our staff come from. We just want whoever cares about looking after vulnerable people and can do a good job, we'll consider to hire them and train them. We do hope that more British-born people will enter social care, but if there's difficulties recruiting local staff, then of course we need to recruit whoever is willing to step up and do the hard work which social care is, but it's very, very vital and important work.
Okay, thank you all for talking to us this morning.